The rain lashed against the windshield of the black executive SUV like 1,000 tiny needles, blurring the neon lights of the distant skyline. Eleanor, the 40-year-old CEO of a premier luxury hotel chain, sat in the back seat, her eyes fixed on a glowing tablet as she reviewed the latest quarterly profits. She was a woman known for her icy composure and a management style that favored results over relationships, often saying that emotions were a luxury her company couldn't afford. Due to a sudden mudslide that blocked the main highway, her driver was forced to take a detour, leading them to one of the company's oldest and most neglected properties on the outskirts of the hills. Eleanor sighed with irritation, dreading the thought of spending a night in a place she had long ago earmarked for demolition. As they pulled into the dimly lit driveway, she noticed a small, flickering light near the edge of the sprawling, overgrown gardens, a place where no one should have been in such a treacherous storm. Driven by a rare spark of curiosity and a need to vent her frustration, Eleanor grabbed an umbrella and stepped out into the howling wind, walking toward the faint glow. She expected to find a trespasser or perhaps a negligent security guard, but instead, she came upon a small, weathered shed tucked behind a massive oak tree. Inside, she saw Samuel, a man in his late 60s who had worked as the estate's groundskeeper for nearly 3 decades. He was kneeling on the cold floor, his thin sweater soaked to the bone, but his attention was entirely focused on a wooden crate lined with old towels. Inside the crate sat a terrified mother cat and her 3 shivering kittens, who had been washed out of their nest by the rising floodwaters. Samuel was gently drying them with a piece of flannel, his voice a soft, melodic murmur that seemed to calm the feline family despite the roar of the thunder outside. Eleanor stood in the doorway, the sharp reprimand she had prepared dying on her lips as she watched the elderly man share his only meal, a small bowl of warm milk and some bread, with the starving animals. She realized that Samuel was using his own small heater to keep the kittens warm while he himself shivered in the drafty shed. This was a man she had considered a mere line item on a budget, a name on a payroll list that she had intended to cut by the end of the year. Yet, here he was, demonstrating a level of selfless leadership and protectiveness that she had never seen in her high-level executives. He looked up and saw her, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet, dignified resolve. He didn't apologize for being there. He simply explained that the smallest guests of the hotel were in danger and that he couldn't leave them to drown in the dark. As the storm raged through the night, Eleanor found herself trapped in the shed, unable to return to the main building due to the rising water. For the first time in years, she was forced to be still and listen. Samuel spoke of his love for the land and the creatures that inhabited it, revealing a profound knowledge of the local ecosystem that surpassed any consultant Eleanor had ever hired. He showed her how he had secretly been crossbreeding rare lilies in a corner of the garden, plants that were worth a fortune but which he grew simply to keep the beauty of the estate alive. He treated the injured and the abandoned as if they were royalty, believing that a place was only as grand as the kindness it showed to its most vulnerable inhabitants. Eleanor looked at her expensive watch and realized that for the once, time didn't mean money. It meant the heartbeat of the shivering kitten she was now holding in her own silk-clad arms. By dawn, the rain had subsided, leaving behind a world that felt washed clean of its old pretenses. Eleanor watched as the mother cat finally began to purr, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of her own hardened heart. She looked at Samuel, who was now peacefully asleep in an old wooden chair, and felt a surge of respect that she had never felt for any business partner. She realized that her definition of success had been narrow and hollow, built on structures of glass that reflected nothing but her own ambition. Samuel had built a kingdom of compassion in a potting shed, and in doing so, he had saved more than just a litter of cats. He had saved her from becoming a ghost in her own life. She knew that the plan to demolish this hotel was over, and a new, much larger vision was beginning to take shape in her mind. The transformation of the property began within the week, but it wasn't the kind of renovation the board of directors expected. Eleanor announced that the hotel would become the flagship for a new type of luxury, one that integrated animal conservation and ecological harmony. She didn't just give Samuel a raise. She appointed him as the chief director of natural heritage for the entire hotel group, giving him the resources to build a state-of-the-art animal sanctuary on the hotel grounds. Samuel moved from his drafty shed into a beautiful cottage overlooking the gardens he had spent his life tending. He no longer had to hide his work. He was now the heart of a global movement that encouraged travelers to connect with nature and support local wildlife. The guardian of the lost garden became a celebrated figure, his story inspiring thousands to look for value in the places and people they had previously ignored. Eleanor's own life underwent a radical shift as she stepped away from the relentless pursuit of profit to focus on the legacy of the sanctuary. She became a frequent sight in the gardens, her sharp suits replaced by practical attire as she learned the art of plant care and animal rehabilitation from Samuel. The company's profits didn't suffer. In fact, they soared as people flocked to a brand that stood for something deeper than just a comfortable bed. The hotel became a place of healing, not just for the animals Samuel rescued, but for the guests who sought refuge from the chaos of the modern world. Eleanor found that her nights were no longer filled with the anxiety of market fluctuations, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference. She had finally found a wealth that could not be measured in currency, but in the trust of a rescued animal's gaze. In the final scene, years later, Eleanor and Samuel are standing on a stone bridge overlooking a pond where the mother cat, now old and pampered, basks in the sun. The garden is a lush, vibrant paradise, filled with the rare lilies Samuel once grew in secret. A group of school children is nearby, listening as a young guide explains the importance of protecting the environment. Eleanor looks at Samuel, whose rough hands are now gentle as he points out a rare butterfly to a curious child, and she realizes that the storm that night was the greatest gift she ever received. It had led her to a man who didn't just maintain her property, but who had repaired her soul. As the sun sets, casting a warm, golden light over the sanctuary, Eleanor knows that she is no longer a guest in her own life. She is a part of the garden, rooted in kindness and blooming with a purpose that will last long after she is gone.